Sure, new technology is cool, but it's time to think outside of the box and imagine what it was like in 1985 and you just got your hands on Sony's first brand new revolutionary 8mm camcorder. Well, in this video, you won't have to imagine because we're going to take a close look at the first Sony Handycam 8mm camcorder, the CCD-M8U. We're going to see what it can do, what it can't do, how it operates, its strengths, its weaknesses. We're going to look at the best way for you to get your hands on one if you want to buy this unique piece of history. And we're also going to take a look at some actual footage taken with this camera, but not from today's era. We're going to go back to the 80s, but you're going to have to stick around and watch the video for that. Don't touch that dial. This is all happening right now. So with the introduction of this tiny new 8mm Handycam, Sony really started the home movie revolution. Now alongside the 8MU, Sony also introduced the 8AF, a full-size version with more professional features. But it was the tiny Handycam that really caught people's eye, and now for the first time you could really shoot video in a tiny package in the palm of your hand. So what's the video quality like of the first 8mm Handycam? This is the CCD-M8U. This is the CCD-M8U. Actually, there's no V in there. It's just the CCD-M8U. Not sure why I put a V in there.
What's that? What is that? A V? Is that for vagina?
Now, while it's great the camera is so small, Sony did have to make some compromises. I mean, it's really bare bones. There's not even a power button. To turn the camera on, you just slide down the lens cover. When you're ready to shoot, you just press the red record button. The focusing is kind of fixed. You have 3 positions, near, intermediate, and far, but you can control white balance. It comes with a built-in mic, which is detachable, which is nice. In case it breaks, you could always swap one out. It's a proprietary cable though, so you can't just attach a regular mic. So this camera actually launched the 8mm video format. The tape is 8mm wide, hence the name, but a confusing name because people were still using actually 8mm film or Super 8mm film, which is also around 8mm wide. Only difference is 8mm film shot about 3 minutes of footage on this reel. You could get 2 hours on an 8mm cassette. Similar to 8mm movie cameras, there was an optical viewfinder, which has its advantages because it's like looking through a window. Everything is in color and it's clear. And there was an overlay for the lights to show your recording. So it was pleasurable to use, except that when you're really close to your subject, the framing may be a bit off. With the 8AF, the bigger model, it was an electronic viewfinder in black and white, so kind of a trade-off. The camera has no zoom control at all, only a fixed lens. So if you wanted to get closer to your subject, you'd have to use the old-fashioned way, by using your feet. So here is some actual footage from the 80s with the camera where I could have used a zoom. When you're far back and you'd really like to zoom in on the seals, with this camera, well, you're sort of just stuck at the same focal length. And by the way, just to prove to you that I really am using this camera in the 80s, well, take a look at the car. You could see that it's clearly back in the 80s. But to give you further proof, look in the side view mirror here. That is me with the CCD-M8U. And here's some shots of me really enjoying myself. You can see the camera has no stabilizer, so even at wide angle, it's a little shaky. And here's an example of some colors. This is a bright orange. And the colors are a little subdued, but again, we're going back 35 some odd years, so not too bad.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Okay.
Press the red button.
Okay.
We've arrived at Canada's Wonderland, perhaps the nicest wonderland in the state of Canada. They have a motto here. It goes, "Come to Canada's Wonderland. It's good."
I think I was trying to be funny there. Not sure if it was too successful. But what's also kind of funny is that if you want to play back your footage after you shot it in the field, for example, to see if it came out, you're out of luck. There's no playback controls either with this camcorder, if you can even call it a camcorder, much like the beta movie cameras that Sony introduced prior to this, which only were record only.
Now this is also like old 8mm film cameras. You shot for 3 minutes and you kept your fingers crossed that everything came out. The big brother, the CCD-M8AF, was able to play back your footage. It had a VCR inside the camera. Of course, it was much bigger.
So to address the concern of playing back the tapes, Sony introduced alongside the M8U the EVC-8U, a little cute 8mm playback deck, and it also came bundled in a carrying case. So with this, you can now play back your tapes in a portable VCR, just like the portable camera. It really was a cute deck with a nice carrying handle. The weird-looking adapter is not so cute, but you need to attach that to the VCR in order to connect your video and audio outputs, and the audio is only mono, but you need this in order to watch your footage on your TV. And voila, now you have a completely modular, portable system. My apology for the messy apartment here. This is actual footage from the 80s. I think my girlfriend back then was a bit of a hoarder, and I think she still is today. Now, having your brand new 8mm camcorder, you certainly wouldn't want to expose it to rain and wind, unless you're kind of stupid. But there was an option for this, and if you wanted to bring the camera underwater, you just unattach the actual side of the camera and use this Handycam sports attachment, which you can get. It is big and bulky, and I actually decided to get it just to check it out. And I had a really tough time opening it up. The camera came shipped inside this thing, and it took quite a while. I thought I was going to break it, but finally I was able to get it open. And you can see that the camera has the entire side grip is detachable from the camera. You have to leave that off so it can lay flat inside. And I had just about as difficult a time getting it back in as I did getting it back out. After I finally got it back in, I would not actually use this underwater. It does not look secure with all the gaps in there. I probably didn't have it in right, but I just lost patience with this thing.
So one of the real hassles with this camera is powering it. It uses this strange, long type rectangular battery that's almost impossible to get now.
But if you search online, you can find this DCP-80 car battery adapter battery. It's basically like a dummy battery.
Who are you calling dummy? Dummy?
Sorry about that. But there's a lead that goes into a cigarette lighter. That's what it was designed for, but just basically a 12-volt battery. Now what I use is an external battery belt battery, which I used to use in my video shooting days, but it still works. So you essentially connect the lead from the battery, dummy battery, into the battery belt. The only problem is you have to carry around the battery around your shoulder or around your waist, so you got this really small camera with this rather large battery and a wire draped around, so it's not so elegant, but you'll power the camera for a really long time. So if you really run out of options, you can try that approach.
Now, we haven't quite finished putting the camera through its tests. What about in lower light, less than optimal conditions? Well, the specs say 25 lux. Now, lux was an old measure used to measure the low light of old camcorders. Here is a low lit room shot with an iPhone. Compare that with the CCD-M8U, and you can see how far we've come in the last 3 decades.
Actually, this is the CCD-M8U. There's no V there.
I eventually realized I was using the V. But this is modern footage shot recently, but it looks old, right? Because it was shot with an 80s camcorder, and with adequate light, it certainly looks a lot better than the low light footage. Nice sun stars, although you shouldn't point the CCD directly at the sun.
Or the CCD-M8.
So if you want to buy this camera, I really recommend looking at eBay because there's always a lot of listings online for the camera. The issue is, since you can't play back the tapes in the camera, many times the seller does not know if it's actually recording. They may see it turn on, but a lot of times you can seem like you're recording and nothing's coming out. So most of the time it's going to be sold as either untested or for parts. So don't spend too much, and you can check sold listings. That's the best way to see what these cameras are actually selling for, and $50, $70 is common, maybe even less. And sometimes you may get lucky and they may include the little VCR along with it and the carrying case, in which case it'll be a little more, but it's nice to have that little VCR to go along with it. This camera does not suffer from the leaky cap problems, which happened more in the later 80s and 90s. That's not to say there may not be problems with the camera working, but it's not impossible to find one that works. So the CCD-M8U, clearly the 8 in the name, stood for 8mm, and Sony launched the 8mm revolution with this camera, with hundreds if not thousands of camcorders that followed in the 8mm format, 8mm, high 8, and later digital 8. Chances are either you or someone in your family had some of your memories on 8mm tape because it really was so common. Now there were a lot of other formats that came out later that weren't as popular as 8mm, and I'll have some videos coming up shortly on those. So that's my teaser for now. In the meantime, stay tuned and subscribe for Tech to Remember, where old tech meets new tech. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next video.